Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, and we will be learning today Mitzvah Hashem Daf Kuf Nun Zayin Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Megillah. We pick up today on Kuf Nun Vav Amid Beis, Siman Tov Reish Tzadik Sif Yud Ches, bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch in the words of the Mechaber. Now, in Sif Yud Ches, the Mechaber told us that Lechatchila we're supposed to strive to have a minyan for Mikra Megillah. Not because Mikra Megillah is a Davar Shebekdusha, it's not a Davar Shebekdusha along the lines of Kedusha or Kaddish or Baruch Hu or Kriyas HaTorah for that matter, but there are two inyanim that are tied up with Mikra Megillah for which we want to have a minyan. One is Persume Nisa. We know that Persume Nisa is a very central theme of Mikra Megillah. Why do we lay the Megillah? We lay the Megillah to publicize the great nisim and the great salvation that the Rabbanu Shalom made for Klal Yisrael. The other one, which we have this concept by many mitzvahs, the concept of Beroiv Am Hadras Melech. Beroiv Am, with a great assembly, Hadras Melech. There's more glorification of the Melech. If we're mefarsim the Nes of Purim, and we say Shirais V'Sishbachais, we thank the Rabbanu Shalom for his Yeshua. If we do that Beroiv Am, if we do that in a greater assembly, Hadras Melech, that's where we have the glorification of the Melech Malchei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it would seem from the halacha that Beroiv Am Hadras Melech takes on even greater application in the context of the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. And for that reason, the Mechaber told us here in Sif Yud Ches that even if you lay in the Megillah Bizmana, now really, like the Mishnah Berurah explained, if you're laning the Megillah Bizmana, if you're laning it on Yudalid or on Tesvav, there really is no need for Persume Nisa because the Nes is already Mefursim. We already have it. On that day, everybody's laning. Yet, still in all, there is an inyan to try to have a minyan. If you can't have a minyan, if you can't pull together 10 people, so then the Mechaber said, V'im efshar ba'asara karam oisa b'yachad. Now, on this note, says the Ramah Haggah, very interesting, V'yesh lihistapek. The Ramah says that in the context of this halacha, of the requirement to try and have 10 people, there is room to question, there's room for doubt, im noshim mitztarfos la'asara. It could be that women would be able to add to that quorum of 10. We never count women for a minyan, but again, that's when we need a minyan for a davar shebekdusha. But over here, where we don't need the minyan for davar shebekdusha, says the Ramah, and he brings this down from the Gais Hashri, brought down in the Torah, that it's possible that women could be mitztarif to give us the necessary 10. Says the Mishnah Berurah, bottom line, because it's possible, since the requirement of 10 over here is Persume Nisa, not Davar Shebekdusha, Sagi Af Benashim. It would be enough to have women there as part of the group of 10. Vayin B'Pri Megadim, he says, take a look at the Pri Megadim. Dimidaloi Hisker Harav Kitanim, since the Ramah does not say that it's possible that Kitanim could be mitztarif to this minyan. Mashma desvir le'diktanim bevadai ein mitztarifin la'asara. The implication is that on that note, the Ramah does not have a question. Ketanim certainly cannot be mitztarif for this minyan. Why? Because they don't have a chiyuv of Mikra Megillah, v'chiyuvan hu rak bitam chinuch. Their chiyuv of Mikra Megillah is only a chiyuv of chinuch. The adults have a chiyuv to be mechanech them in the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah, but they do not inherently have a chiyuv of Mikra Megillah, while women do. Like we've said, Avhein Haisa Ba'isai Hanes, the women were also saved in the Nes of Purim, and therefore they are very much part of it, and they also have a chiyuv of Mikra Megillah. Now the truth is, by children, you could also say the svara of Avhein Haya Ba'isai Hanes, they also were saved, but that doesn't make them become a bar chiyuva. Since they're children, they cannot have chiyuvim placed on them. Okay, now we continue with the Ramah top line, Kuf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Now we have another case. So we've said that we tried to pull together a minyan for Mikra Megillah. Why? Essentially for Presumei Nisa. However, it says the Ramah, V'im karu oisa b'tzibur. Let's say the Megillah was already leined b'tzibur. So let's say somebody lives in a small town. They already got together in the shul. Everybody leined Megillah. They heard Megillah. Ve'ez yachid lo shema'a. Somebody didn't make it to Mikra Megillah. He's homebound. He needs to hear Megillah. Or maybe he was in shul, but he had to step out and he wasn't yotzeh. So v'im karu oisa b'tzibur. If you did lein the Megillah already b'tzibur in town, ve'ez yachid lo shema'a. And now a yachid, an individual, for whatever reason, did not hear the Megillah and was not yotzeh Mikra Megillah, yuchal likrois afilu lechatchila b'yachid. Then, says the Ramah, you could even lein the Megillah lechatchila b'yachidus for this individual. Or he himself could read the Megillah for himself lechatchila. He doesn't even have to try to get a minyan. Why, says the Ramah? Hayil v'kairin oisa ba'oisa ir ba'asara. Since the Megillah was already leined in a minyan, so Presumei Nisa for the Mikra Megillah was already accomplished in this locale. And since Presumei Nisa was already accomplished, now you don't even have to try for a Mikra Megillah to help out, for a minyan for Mikra Megillah to help out this yachid. It's not even necessary lechatchila. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Samach Daled lechatchila b'yachid. Why? Tahanes kfar nisparsem, because you already accomplished Presumei Nisa. V'leka rak mishum b'roivam. And at this point, the only reason for a minyan would be roivam hadras melech. A davar shebekdusha, it's not. Presumei Nisa, you already accomplished. You already had Presumei Nisa. So why would you strive to have a minyan? Only for b'roivam hadras melech. For b'roivam hadras melech alone, you don't have to be matriach to go pull together a minyan. So v'leka rak mishum b'roivam, loy matrichina loy lemichnaf asara. For that alone, you do not have to gather 10 people. So what comes out? It seems that what comes out over here is Presumei Nisa, which is such an ikr when it comes to the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. For that, you have to be matriach to try and go have a Mikra Megillah with a minyan. But if Presumei Nisa was already accomplished, if Presumei Nisa was already done, so it was leined, the Megillah was leined b'tzibur in your locale, then you don't even have to strive for a minyan anymore, because then it's only for b'roivam hadras melech. For that alone, you don't have to be matriach to get a minyan. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, v'ha de kaimelon, and this that we have said earlier, da'afin yesh lo minyan bebeisai, even if you have a minyan in your house. So you just gave a daf yomi shir in your house, you have 10 people, and now it's time for Megillah. Afilu hachi mevatlin talmud Torah va'avoda leilech v'likrois b'tzibur mishum b'roivam. We had this halacha earlier. We said mevatlin talmud Torah for Mikra Megillah. And what we said over there was that what that means is, even if you have people gathered in your house, and really you could lein the Megillah with a minyan in your house, but in the main shul, they have 500 people hearing Megillah, you are mevatel talmud Torah. Even if it's going to cost you, you're going to have to cut the daf yomi share down. Instead of having the share for an hour, you're going to have to cut the share down to a half an hour so everybody could go over to the shul to hear Megillah. Mevatlin talmud Torah, for what? In order to accomplish b'roivam hadras melech. So you see, you're mevatel talmud Torah for b'roivam hadras melech. So why is it that you're mevatel talmud Torah for roivam hadras melech? But now over here, where a yachid needs to hear Mikra Megillah, you say he doesn't have to be matriach to get a minyan for b'roivam hadras melech. If you're mevatel talmud Torah for b'roivam hadras melech, it would seem that certainly you should be matriach to pull together 10 people for b'roivam hadras melech. Says Mishnah Berurah, no. Hasam, over there in that case of mevatel talmud Torah for the roivam hadras melech, haloi hatzibur mezumin lefanov. There's no question of being matriach to pull together a tzibur. You know exactly where the tzibur is. You have to close the daf yomi share, leave your house, and go across the street to the big shul. That you do for Rav Amhadas Melech. Masha'eken hacha, but in the context of the halacha that we're discussing here, lasois tzibur, to go outside and atzenta, and pull together a minyan, ain't a mechuyev. That you're not mechuyev to do. Vayim b'Yad Ephraim, and he says further, take a look at the Yad Ephraim, Shekosov writes, the din zeh shehevi harama b'shem archas chayim, einoi muskim l'shari paiskim. Not everybody agrees with this Ramah. V'lachein af b'kahagavna yahadar achar asar anoshim. Yad Ephraim says that really, even in this case, where the Megillah was already leined with a tzibur, it's still kedai to try to pull together a tzibur. The Dirshu footnote number 62 brings down over here from the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish hiskim l'das Ramah. Chazon Ish paskin like this Ramah. V'hoisiv she'ein chilik bazeh bein bizmana l'shaloi bizmana. That you don't have to be so concerned to pull together a tzibur if the Megillah was already leined b'tzibur in that locale. Okay, let's finish off the Siman over here with the final few words of the Ramah, 3 lines down by the Yos Katan Samachay. For the Mishnah Berurah says to Ramah, Ukishahayachid kaira oisa bizmana, when a yachid is leining the Megillah in the proper time on Yodalid for an open city, Tesvav for an Irmukav Chayma Mimois Yeshua Benun, Tzarich Levarech Aleha, he certainly has to make a bracha. Point being, even though he's leining it b'yechidus, he certainly has to make a bracha. Says to Mishnah Berurah, Yos Katan Samachay, Ukishayachid kaira oisa, Haidu b'makam di'i efshaloi lekabetz asara, where he was unable to pull together a minyan, Oy begavna detzir harama mikaidim, or in the Ramah's case. So he's giving you 2 cases over here. Either the Ramah's case, which is that it was already leined in that locale, and for whatever reason, he wasn't able to hear the Megillah, he wasn't able to come to shul and hear it with the minyan, or in the case where simply they weren't able to pull together a minyan at all. In either one of those cases, the Ramah says the Yachid would certainly make a bracha on the Kriya. Ois Katan Samach Vav, Bismana, La'afuke. What does the Ramah mean when he says that if a Yachid leins the Megillah Bismana in its proper time, then he makes a bracha? And what if he's not leining it in its proper time? Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Samach Vav, La'afuke. This stands in contrast to Im Kairei HaYachid Oisa Shaloi Bismana. If a Yachid, if a single individual is leining the Megillah outside of its proper time. Kigayin, for example. Kigayin. Krachin amukafin chayma. If somebody lives in an irmukav chayma mivaisi Yeshua benun, de misrami yoy tesvav shalahen b'Shabbos, and tesvav fell out on Shabbos, so they cannot lein on Shabbos. So we have this person who lives in a mukafir chayma. They're supposed to lein on Tesvav. Tesvav fell out on Shabbos. On Shabbos you can't lein because of the Gzeira Shemi Avirena Dalanamis Berushus Arabim. So they're going to lein on Yodalid. And now you have a Yachid, somebody who's doesn't have a minyan, so he is going to lein it alone, outside of its Zman. He really should lein on Tesvav, but he's leining on Yodalid. The Karin Oisa Be'erev Shabbos, for who Karin Oisa B'Yachid, Lo Yavarech Aleh B'Chol Gavni. Then he would not make a bracha. The Chanal B'Siv Katan Samach Aleph, like we saw yesterday in this year in Samach Aleph. Such a person cannot make a bracha. Why can't he make a bracha? Because his whole leining is subject to a machlokes rishonim, whether or not the minyan is ma'akiv or the minyan is not ma'akiv, and it's not in its proper time, he cannot make a bracha. That concludes Siman Tov Reish Tzadik. Now we move on to Siman Tov Reish Tzadik Aleph, where we are going to begin with some very technical, some very technical details of Ksivas Megillah, preparation of ink, preparation of parchment. These are halachas, Mirz Hashem. We are coming very close to reaching the beginning of Mishnah Berurah all over again, starting again with Chelik Aleph, and when we do Chelik Aleph, B'Yirtzeh Hashem, we'll hit Hilchas Tefillin, and we're going to have to cover a lot of the halachas of Ksivas Stam, writing Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzahs, and we're going to go over some of these halachas then in finer detail. As you're going to see from the Mishnah Berurah here, the Mishnah Berurah is going to be sending us to Siman Lamed Beis in Hilchas Tefillin. So over here, we'll cover it briefly. B'Yirtzeh Hashem, when we reach Hilchas Tefillin, we'll cover it in greater detail. Siman Tafresh Tzadik Aleph, Dinei Ksivas HaMegillah, the halachas that pertain to the writing of the Megillah, Utfirasa, and the sewing together of the various portions of the Megillah, Uba Yuda Aleph Seifim, and here we have 11 Seifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Ein Kaisvin HaMegillah Ella B'Diyoi. You cannot write the Megillah with any other type of ink. It has to be Diyoi. What's Diyoi? Well, if you look at the Rambam, if you pull together from two different halachas in the Rambam, Hilchas Tefillin, Perik Aleph, I think it was halacha Dalid, and Perik Yud, halacha Aleph. If you take a look at the Rambam seems to say that the diyoi, it has to be black, it has to make a lasting impression, it has to be a writing that's a lasting writing, but interestingly enough, preferably it should be a writing that is erasable. So it has to be lasting, but it also preferably should be something that is erasable. So ain't kaisvin ha-Megillah ela b'diyoi. You have to write the Megillah using an ink that is called diyoi. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cotton Aleph. Ayin la'el b'siman lamed beis sif gimel. He sends us to Siman lamed beis sif gimel b'haga, in the words of the Ramah of the Mishnah Berurah Sham, and to the Mishnah Berurah over there, Mishnah Berurah is Cotton Ches. So, if we pull out a Chelik Aleph and we take a look at Sif Gimel, Siman Lamed Beis Sif Gimel, the Mechaber, speaking about Tefillin, says, Yichtevim, you should write the Parshias of the Tefillin, B'diyoi Shachar, using black diyoi. Bein sheyesh by mei afotzim, you could use ink that has gall nut juices, Bein shaloi b'mei afotzim, or whether it does not have gall nut juices. Ulechatchila, says the Ramah says that lechatchila, yachmir, you should be machmir, lichtayv b'diyoi, to write with ink, ha'asuya me'ashan eitzim, using the soot of burnt wood, oishmanim, or the soot that is collected by burning oils, shruyim b'mei afotzim. So you take this soot and you mix the soot with gallnut juice. The Ramah says you should be machmir to use that type of ink. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Cotton Ches, me'ashan eitzim, using the soot that you accumulate by burning wood. Pirish, Mishnah Berurah says, what does this mean? In other words, you have to have a blackening agent. Me afotzim. First of all, what are afotzim? Afotzim are usually translated as gall nuts. I think the proper terminology for them, I think they're called oak galls. An oak gall is a very interesting substance. You can see them on oak trees sometimes. Very interestingly enough, it's not something that is natural to the oak tree. It's something that comes about due to an interaction between the oak tree, and I think the sap of the oak tree, and wasps. It seems that when wasps lay eggs in a crevice in the oak of the bark tree, this oak gall, it's kind of like a bubble, forms on the oak tree. And you take those oak nuts or oak galls, gall nuts, and somehow you process them, you get a juice out of them. That creates a liquid which I believe is rust-colored or light brown. So you need to add to this juice, you need to add a blackening agent because it's got to be black. So what do you add? You add soot. It could be soot that's collected from burning wood, or he says soot that's collected from burning oils. Other Rishonim say soot that's collected from burning pitch, but that's your blackening agent. Says the Mishnah Berurah here in Hilchos Tefillin, but lechatchila, you don't put in kuma, which is some kind of a resin, oikankantum, which is, he says here, shekarim b'loshen Ashkenaz copper Wasser, copper water. It is ferrous sulfate. That's what it is. Ferrous sulfate is something derived from iron ore. Why should you lechatchila not use this kankantum or kuma? Because that creates an ink which is not erasable. Scientifically, what happens when you add ferrous sulfate to gall juice, this gall juice has a very high level of a chemical substance called tannins. When the tannins mix, when they combine with the ferrous sulfate, that creates an ink that penetrates the paper or the parchment much deeper, and now you end up with a writing that's not erasable. And says the Mishnah Berurah, lechatchila, you're supposed to use an ink which is erasable. But if you use this kuma, this resin, or the kankantum, or the ferrous sulfate, then you end up with a ksav that's einoi nimchak. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'zehu hakoil lemitzvah min hamuvchar balvad, but this is all only a mitzvah min hamuvchar, aval ledina, gama Ramah moide demutar lasos b'mei hafotzim v'kuma v'kankantum. The Ramah agrees that al pidin, you could use this mei hafotzim and the kuma, the resin, or the kankantum, the ferrous sulfate. V'chein noihagin lasos kahayom al yedei ta'aruva shloshton v'al yedei bishul. Chavetz Chaim says that's how we're noig nowadays. We use this gall juice derived from the oak galls together with the kuma. I believe it's kuma or ferrous sulfate. Well, no, he says shloshtan, all three. So the kuma is this resin, and the kankantum is the ferrous sulfate. V'al yedei bishul, they are all cooked together. Tahachi adif tvei, because that makes a better ink. Okay? If you want to know anything more than that about the preparation of the diyai, you're going to have to speak to a Heintika Sefer who specializes in this type of knowledge. What I know over here is from my own research and from speaking to Seferim over the years. Recently, one Batemacher told me that they've come up with a new development in the diyai that makes it even better. I don't know what that development is. Okay. So in any case, now as Mishnah Berurah is cut in Aleph, we use diyai, and he sent us the Siman Lamed Beis of Gimel, the Ramah, and the Mishnah Berurah that I just read to you. Now let's go back to the Mechaber. So far we've covered ink. Ein kaiser Megillah ela b'diyai. We have to use this diyai type ink. Now, what is the writing surface? Says the Mechaber, al hagvil. You could write it either on gvil, Oi al haklaf, or you could write it on klaf. Kisefer Torah, like a Sefer Torah. Please bear with me with my voice. My apologies. So, the Mechaber says you could write on gvil or on klaf like a Sefer Torah. What is gvil? What is klaf? Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Beis, al hagvil. What is gvil? So before I even read the Mishnah Berurah inside, how is parchment produced? We all know that parchment comes from the hide of an animal. So we take a cow, strip off the hide. Parchment is made from the hide. Now, leather is also made from the hide. Yet the parchment on the Sefer Torah doesn't look anything like your belt, or it doesn't look anything like the ritzuas of your tefillin. It's all animal hide, right? So what's the difference? Well, parchment, what the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us, and what we see in our sources, is that the hide of the animal, and when you buy leather nowadays, you can actually buy what's called splits. The hide could be split into different layers of its thickness. The entire hide, so going from the very outside of the animal where the hair is, going to the underside of the hide, right where it meets the flesh of the animal, the entire hide altogether is called gvil. Now, gvil could be processed in such a way that will allow you to write on it. And you could write on either surface. Either the outer surface, after the hair is removed, that outer surface could be prepared so that you could write on it, or the very inner surface where it attaches to the flesh. That surface of the gvil could also be prepared for writing. But the entire thickness of the hide in one piece, that's called gvil. Then you could split the hide into two layers. If you split the hide into two layers, you now have two different layers with four surfaces. You have the outer layer. The outer layer has an outer surface where the hair was, and an inner surface where it was attached to the inside layer. The inside layer has the outer surface where it was attached to the outer layer, and it has an inner surface where it was attached to the flesh. So we have two layers, four surfaces. The two layers are called klaf. That's the outer layer that had the hair. The outer layer is called klaf. The inner layer is called Dirshu. That's what the inner layer is called. So, again, gvil, that's the entire hide in one piece. If you split it, you now have the outer layer, the outer split is called klaf. The inner split is called Dirshu. Now let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Ice cotton base. The Mechaber said you could write on gvil, ala gvil. Says the Mishnah Berurah, hu ha'or, that's the hide, shaloi nechlak, that was not split, v'loi husar mimenu rak haseor. All they did was they removed the hair from the outer surface of the gvil. In the tanning process, you take the hide, you soak the hide in salts, and you soak it in lime. That's done after the salting. You have to first soak it in salts to dry it out and preserve it. After you have it in salts and you wash off all the salts, now you take the hide and you soak it in lime. After the hide soaks in lime, the lime opens up the hair follicles. Once the hair follicles are opened, you could literally wipe off the hair and the hair comes out. After that, there's some more processing that needs to be done to the outer surface to prepare it for writing. But that's what the Mishnah Berurah is saying here. What's gvil? Hu ha'or, that's the entire hide. Shaloi nechlak, that was not split. V'loi husar mimenu rak haseor. All they did was the process of removing the hair from the outer surface. V'tiknoi sham. And they prepared that outer surface for writing. Umitzad habasar lo husar klum. But on the inner surface of the gvil, the inner surface where it was attached to the flesh, there they did not do anything. They didn't prepare that surface at all. So if you're going to write on gvil, you're writing on the outermost surface of the hide of the animal when the hair has been removed. But you have the entire hide in one section. That's gvil. Now we go to Ois Cut and Gimel. Oi ala klaf. Or you could write on klaf. What's klaf? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Hayle'el b'siman lamed beis sif zayin. He sends us back to Hilchos Tefillin, siman lamed beis sif zayin. Now, I'm not going to go back to the Mishnah Berurah, but I can read to you here from a Dirshu footnote, which was pretty well written, and that is footnote number 3. We take a look at footnote number 3. The Shulchan Aruch writes back in Hilchos Tefillin and Siman Lamed Beis, Shebishas ibud ara behema, when you process the hide of the animal, hayun noyagim, the minhag was bisman Talmud in the times of the Gemara, lach like es ha'or b'uvyay l'shnayim, to split the thickness of the hide in two. The klaf is the outer layer, like I told you. That's the outer split that has the hair on it. The inner layer that's attached to the flesh, nikra dursustus, that's called dursustus. V'koisvim ala klaf b'tzidai hapnimi hakarev lebasar. See, this is interesting. If you're going to write on gevil, then you write on the outermost layer of the hide. You remove the hair and you prepare the outermost surface for writing. But if you're going to split the hide and you're going to split it into klaf and dursustus, then you take the klaf and you don't prepare the hair side, the outer side of the klaf for writing. You prepare the inner side of the klaf for writing. Tahainu b'makom chiburai l'dursustus. That's the side that was attached to the inner layer, to the dursustus layer. Ubizmanenu, nowadays, they write here, oid mimer rishonim, back in the days of the rishonim still, ein noihagim lach loikes ha'ar l'shtayim. Nowadays, and if you research the manufacture of parchment nowadays, it is as they write here, bezmanenu ein noihagim lach loikes ha'ar l'shtayim. Nowadays, they do not split the hide into two splits. They don't separate the klaf and the dursustus. Or rather, what they do is goyrim harbe esaor mechelkai apnimi shemitzad habasar. Nowadays, what they do is they strip off the entire hide, they soak it in salts, they wash it down to remove the salts, they soak the hide in lime, they remove the hair, then they flip over the hide and they take the inner side of the hide. So that's now the inner side of the dursustus. They take the hide, they stretch it on frames, and then they take a metal scraper and they scrape off the inside of the hide. They scrape off the inner layer, shemitzad habasar, that was attached to the basar of the animal, ad shaloi nisheres mimamoshus me'adursustus, until there's nothing left from the dursustus layer. Umichelkai achitzain, on the outer layer, that's the outer layer of the animal, shemitzad haseir, the hair side, mekalpa ma'ates klipasay el yoina, they only take off an outer layer, kedei lahoyridus haseir, to take off the hair, or lahachlik ha'aret, to smooth it out. So what he's describing is, what they do nowadays when they make parchment is they remove the whole hide, they do not split it. So they have what we initially called gevil. But then what they do is, after the salting and the soaking in lime and the removal of the hair, then they stretch it out on frames, they stretch it very taut, and then they use these metal scrapers and they basically scrape off the dursustus layer. The dursustus layer is like a membrane. It's like a skin. They scrape that off until you now have the inner layer of the klaf that is prepared for writing. Okay. And with that, let's go further in the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber, last two words of the first line of Siman Tafrit Tzadik Aleph. Vim ksava b'mei hafatza v'kankantum kshera. If you used a diyoi that was made the way we described and the way we saw in the Mishnah Berurah in Siman Lamed Beis, using mei hafatzim, using this gold juice, v'kankantum and ferrous sulfate, kshera, that is kosher. And the reason he's making a point of this, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Daled, Ayin B'taz B'Shem HaKesef Mishnah, the Makshech Shiru B'mei hafatzim. First of all, when we're saying that you could use diyoi made out of mei hafatzim, hainu im guma, it needs to have, the Taz says, you have to add guma, you have to add resin. To be mei hafatzim l'chud pasul, because mei hafatzim alone is not kosher. You know why? Because it's not black. It's rust colored or brown. So when the Mechaber says over here, you could write it with mei afotzim, Taz says, well, it's got to be mei afotzim and guma. V'chein hiskem agra b'biyuroi de b'shtem yachad nikra diyoi. You get diyoi out of mei afotzim and guma. V'chein, continues the Mishnah Berurah, kankantum demachshirinan, hainu b'mei kankantum. And when we say you could use kankantum, it means a kankantum solution, a ferrous sulfate solution. Ferrous sulfate is a powder. You can't write with a powder. It's got to be a ferrous sulfate solution. Dilu kankantum l'chud b'vadei posel. V'agra b'biyurei perish, Damasha Amar b'mei afotzim v'kankantum, hainu shekasim b'shtei b'uravin yachad, v'ayel el b'siman lamedei sif gimel b'ber halacha dibra maschil, Bain, where we use all three. We use mei afotzim, and we blacken it with guma and with kankantum, with ferrous sulfate. And again, one of the points of the Mechaber here, when he says that if you use this type of diyoi that's comprised of mei afotzim and kankantum, it's kosher, even though it is now not erasable. Continues the Mechaber. Ksava b'shar minei tzivainim. If you wrote the Megillah using other types of dyes, psula, then the Megillah would be puzzle. Furthermore, says the Mechaber, utzricha sirtut. A Megillah requires sirtut. What is sirtut? That's the process by which we engrave into the parchment lines so that the Megillah is ruled and the Sefer writes in those lines. HaTorah atzma, just like a Sefer Torah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton hay. Utzricha sirtut, hainu al kol shita v'shita. This means that we need the sirtut on every line. But it seems that we don't necessarily need sirtut on the sides, on the margins. Ois cotton vav, HaTorah atzma. The Mechaber says that it has to be written with sirtut like a Sefer Torah. Whoa. Says the Mishnah Berurah, okay, you're telling me now that the halachas of the writing of the Megillah are similar to the halachas of the writing of the Sefer Torah. Valkein, therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, chok tuchais. If you create letters by engraving or cutting out their insides, puzzle ba, that would be puzzle. What is chok tuchais? Well, there's two ways you could form a letter out of ink. The normal way is you take a quill, you dip it in the ink, and you write the shape of the letter. But there's another way you can make a letter. Take a quill, make a closed square of ink. So now you have a black square. Now take a razor and cut out the ink that you do not want to expose the cloth, and by doing so, form a letter. So you want to make a mem, an endamem, a mem sophis. You have a square of black ink, cut out the middle, and now you basically have a mem sophis. There are other forms of chayk tuchais also. I'll give you another example. Let's say you have a dalid, and you want to turn it into a resh. It's very easy to turn a dalid into a resh. What do? Well, on a dalid, the gag, the roof of the dalid, extends beyond the back of the leg of the dalid. So have a dalid, take a razor, cut that extension off. Now you basically have a resh. So you can form letters by chok tuchais, not by writing the letter itself, but by cutting away what you don't want to form the letter. That's possible in the Sefer Torah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you're telling me that the halach of the Megillah is like the halach of the Sefer Torah? Well, in that case, chok tuchais is possible. But the Mishnah Berurah points out, we should realize with this kind of halacha, v'dafka beruba, that would only be true if you made roiv of the Megillah using a chok tuchais process. Alva b'miyuta, if you did one letter, so there was a dalid and you wanted to change it into a resh, and you made it by chok tuchais, that wouldn't be a problem. Kasher b'di'evet. B'di'evet, that would be kasher. Why? Do you remember why? The leigara mehishmit, because it's not worse than if that resh would have been left out of the Megillah completely. And le'el b'sibit taf reish tzadik siv gimel ayin sham pratei advarim. We saw earlier in taf reish tzadik siv gimel that even if the Megillah is missing almost half of its words, b'di'evet it's kosher, right? Look at B'di'eved, you can have a Megillah that's missing up to half of its words. So okay, so you have a letter that you wrote Chak Tuchais, so fine, so that letter's not there. B'di'eved, the Megillah is still kosher. Okay, let's finish off this sif, says the Mechaber, 3 lines down. Ve'ena arsha lo tzarech la'abed lishma. According to the first opinion mentioned over here, the klaf does not have to be prepared lishma. It doesn't have to be prepared l'shem Megillah. The yeshayimrim, however, there is a yeshayimrim, the Rebbeinu Tam, she tzarech ibud lishma, that it does need ibud lishma. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ois kat zayin. The yeshayimrim she tzarech, the Rebbeinu Tam says you need ibud lishma. The ched pasuk Rabbi Moshe Min Siman Samach Aleph, that you do need ibud lishma, and the Sha'ar Tzion ois kat Dalet says b'di'eved yesh lahater. B'di'eved, you could be samech on the day of Rishona that you do not need ibud lishma. Okay, we'll stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be banging against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh should send Yeshua Zefurus Parnasa Shidduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the BS Gal Tzedek from Hera v'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.